winter. I was able to not travel to Chicago at all. Skype and internet provided me all the opportunities to have influence, but without having to be up there and freeze.
So for the sake of the video, we'll get started here for our viewing. I want to introduce Dr. Bill Ankner, who's a former Secretary of Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. So when I first met him, he was secretary, and I've known he's a leader in transportation in the United States. He's run transportation agencies in Port Authority, New York, New Jersey, and held leadership positions in these different organizations in Rhode Island and certainly Louisiana. And he was brought here to Louisiana to be a transportation reformer, and he was unfortunately terminated because he was a transportation reformer. You know, I remember him giving a speech that I attended downtown New Orleans, and he said that as a transportation secretary, his goal is to get everybody, if we want to have a fiscally sound transportation system in Louisiana, he would need to encourage everybody to drive the most fuel inefficient cars possible as far as possible, which is not to say that that's what he believes we all should be doing, but is to say that the issues that our transportation finance system has, not just in Louisiana, but in every state and across the country, is very much flawed fundamentally based on how we fund transportation in the United States. But he's a leader in both passenger transportation as well as working on freight transportation issues, and he's an advisor to some of the leading transportation organizations like the Eno Transportation Foundation. So I just want to welcome you here to UNO and look forward to hearing you talk about the role of transportation in society.
Well, thanks. Well, that's a topic, by the way, that we could, if you've got several years, we could probably fully explore. I don't, if you don't mind, I'd just like to know who's all here. Hi.
Hi, good morning. My name is Valerie Jefferson. I'm with ATU Local 1560 Women Caucus. That's a bus transit authority of New Orleans.
Okay, great.
Sorry. I'm Tara Telford, work for UNO Transportation.
I'm sorry, yeah.
I'm research staff here at UNO.
Okay. You know, you can sit at the big table. I know that the kids' table these days are very popular in politics, but you can come and join the grown-up table if you like.
Jennifer Stenhouse with Center for Planning Excellence, or CPEX.
Steele Welch with Quality Counts. Justin Augustine, Transnet.
Eric Deason, TMG Consultant.
I'm Matt Rufo, I'm a Senior Planner with GCR.
Tim Griffin, I'm a student here at UNO.
I'm Maury Atkinson, I'm a graduate student here at UNO as well.
Jim Ambell, Senior Research Associate at the Transportation Institute.
Well, thanks. Well, thank you all for having me. Don't hold my past against me. But the issue of transportation in society, for any transportation really is something, as a body of knowledge and study, is relatively new. For the most part, for most of human activity, it's been just that, an activity. Our basic form of transportation in almost all societies was, and to some extent still remains, walking. And transportation, and one of the things that I hope will remain with you from our conversation is one concept that I think is critical, and that is transportation is not an end in itself. Transportation is part of the community, and it is the community that, or society, that dictates what kinds of transportation activities it wants or wants to encourage. Certain countries, you're riding an elephant, or you're riding a camel, or you're riding a horse. you're running. It's only recently that we had the trains and the buses and the automobiles. And these kinds of mobility options affect how our society interacts, not only amongst ourselves, but also what the land around us, and what it is that we want to do or want to achieve. There was a point in your parents' lives when automobiles were just in the 50s and all, when automobiles were really becoming a more of a available option in this country. We went for a Sunday drive. That's why we had parkways. They were truly parkways, and it was intended for you to go out and go see other places in a very pleasant environment. Hojo's, Howard Johnson's, had restaurants almost on all of the parkways. Right? And he had it exclusive. And when you went and you might have eaten there, and you had a full course meal, right? Because you were out for pleasure and it was leisure.
And no traffic.
And very little traffic. And it's transportation and its involvement with the community really is changes because of the community and what the community is looking for. As we saw in this country, the move more into the suburban areas, out away from our urban areas. We saw the demise of a number of public transit systems happening. On a rail, passenger rail, we saw the demise of a lot of the passenger rail because it wasn't sustaining its operating self. And we had the collapse in the Northeast, and government created Conrail and it created Amtrak. But the rail freight side wanted to get rid of passenger because it was a disaster on their bottom line. And it was also occupying space that they felt they could use for freight, which was more lucrative for them. How we have adapted to our needs is really many times transportation needs a result of decisions that we're making on other things about our society, where we want to work, where we want to live. So as you look at transportation, one of the key questions is, what do people want from their transportation system? What's the purpose of their travel? And right now, that's starting to change. The boomers, like myself, are retiring. We're not looking for a world of 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. We're not looking to commute on a daily basis. We're looking at very different kinds of transportation needs. We're looking to go see our grandchildren, as I just did, babysat last weekend in Houston. We're looking for access to education, culture, more to opportunities that have nothing to do with work. With work, we're downsizing in terms of our work. And so that becomes an occasional element of our day. So that changes the dynamics of what is going to be demanded of a transportation system. What is it that you want, or what do you need? And currently, our transportation system is geared primarily to peak period traffic. That demand. And that demand is starting to change. Partly with the boomers, but for the most part, is coming from you and technology. Your demands for transportation are very different. Yes, work is still, in some cases, an important criteria. But work itself has changed. We're doing more telework that's going on. As our technology has improved, as greater high-speed access becomes available, telework is becoming much more of an activity. So you want to go to work 2 days a week into an office. I mean, it's getting so that Booz Allen Hamilton, which is not a small group of people, as a business, made a decision in the Washington D.C. area where their headquarters were, that they want their people out in the field. They're out on projects. They're out selling proposals, etc. And a lot of their work can be done all electronically through the so they downsize their office. And instead of having an office with lots of a building with lots of office private space and people fighting for who gets the windows and who does it, or how many centimeters more does that person have in their office than somebody else, they basically have done away with all of that, including their executive management folks. And there's lots of conference rooms that are all able to deal with internet and telecommunications, and they have some private offices that you can book for private meetings if needed, if you have with clients and things like that. But for the most part, you don't have your own desk. You have group places where you can go, plug in, and work. By the way, they have cut their costs for building, for office costs, by almost 50% by going to that kind of model. And the employees seem to like it as well. That doesn't mean that people don't get together. They do in conferences and both electronically as well as in person. But they're only there 2 or 3 days a week, if that. So it is very different. We're moving into a very different world, all because of things like the laptops and this little device. We're in a mobile world, a world that I'm still struggling to try to understand. I have to call my 17-year-old granddaughter and say, "Excuse me, Montana, but could you help me out?" And it really is pathetic when she takes a look and says, "Papa, you've done this all wrong." And in less than a minute, it's right, and I struggled for a day and a half trying to figure out how I had screwed up whatever the program that was supposed to be in there. So it is very much a different world that we're in. With that, we're also changing what our society is with technology. Now, Facebook, tweets, text messages. This is a very different world. Communications is instantaneous. And it requires different types of mobility. And I view communications, whether by phone or text, as a form of transportation. This is how you and others are maximizing your time with your mobility. You have greater mobility now with this kind of device and the kind of information that you have access to than anyone has ever had before. I mean, this is a really exciting period of time. I mean, you probably heard this before, but it's not. There is more intelligent capacity in this device than what we had to send a man to the moon, right? Just one device. We had rooms full of computers that were, 10, 15 feet tall and filled. Right? There's more computing capacity here than we had in 1969. Right? And it doesn't need air conditioning. Is that world dead? But it's a different, but you're able to get around. And with Google Map, you can basically be anywhere you want in the world and get an understanding of it. You can go and see what the traffic is in New York City right now, if you want to. Why anybody would want to do that unless you travel there, I don't know. But if you wanted to, you can. This is part of our transportation system. This is part of your world. And your communications. When we're at a family gathering, and then she was 16, granddaughter and my niece, who was 15, and they were sitting across from each other. My sister got very mad. And, you don't see each other that often. Why aren't you two talking? And they both looked up and they said, we are. They were texting each other. Why they were texting each other when they were right across from each other, I still don't know or understand. But I realized afterwards that that is not unique. That they were not somehow needing therapy for doing that. That was a common. You can the Skype. You don't have to travel to a job necessarily. You don't have to travel to your parents just to say hi to them. They can actually see you and have a conversation with you right there. Work as it is now doesn't require your actual presence. So that whole world is starting to change. And as we move into a telework kind of environment with your generation, it's going to get even more. You're familiar with these devices and at home with them and working with them. If you don't have them, that becomes a liability for a company that's trying to hire you because you're not. You want to be able to continue some of these kinds of utilizations. Well, that's going to have an impact on peak period commuting. If you're not commuting, you're able to telework, there's going to be less access to the roadways during the peak periods. Now, it may have other impacts that we certainly haven't realized or haven't addressed. If you're able to live elsewhere in the smaller communities, things like that, or stay here in the city as opposed to go off to the suburbs to work, guess what? You're going to go out for lunch, and so you're going to be going out at times of the day that are not peak period, and as a result may require you to use a transportation system that was never built for that kind of demand. One of the interesting things right now on the East Coast and to San Francisco area, Washington Metro and New York City subways, their peak period for passengers is now between 11 and 1. Washington Metro has had to change its schedules of the frequency of their service because the demand was so great for people going from one part of the city to the other during that quote unquote lunch hour or two. And they're not just going for restaurants and things like that, they're shopping, they're going to the Washington Mall and jogging or walking and clearing their heads and things like that. So our lifestyles, as well as, again, are influencing what's happening in the transportation, as opposed to transportation necessarily, the demographic changes that are occurring. The baby boomers don't need the big mansions anymore. Right? 2 people in a 4-bedroom home with lots of other rooms, wander around. When the kids come home, maybe at the holidays or spring break, and then even that it disappears quickly. What do I need all of this room for? Why am I paying all of this money for all of these rooms? Why, in God's name, am I still mowing that lawn? So what's happening? They're moving and they're downsizing, and they're moving more and more to the urban centers. Why? Because they're able to get the things that they're interested in.
No yard.
No yard.
Maintenance.
Right? Don't have to worry about school systems anymore. I have hospitals nearby, which become more important as you get older. I've got entertainment, and it's good quality entertainment. I've got parks and libraries and movie theaters, and it's within walking distance. And that's changing. Your generation at the moment seems to be moving much more into the urban core as well, to the extent that you can afford to get into the urban core in some of these communities. And you're not interested. You have the lowest number of licenses, auto licenses, driver's licenses, that we've seen. Because we've been collecting that kind of information. Right? As a group, the millennials are not getting driver's licenses. The number of cars that they're buying isn't there. Well, it makes sense if you don't have a license.
Do you foresee that changing? Because I've read a couple of articles where they think that millennials are going to move into urban cities or into urban centers whenever they're younger, and then whenever they're ready to do child raising, they'll move back to the suburbs.
That's possible. I think the biggest thing that'll affect that, or some of the biggest factors, are going to be factors that actually encourage the movement out of the cities. One is education. What kinds of education, public education, am I going to have for my child?
I don't see that happening in New Orleans. Most of the people that live in my neighborhood, which is in the urban core, are a lot of young people with kids that have no desire to leave the core to get better schools. They'd rather take a chance and get their kids to a good charter school, or worst case scenario, send them to a private school. I'm just shocked how many people with kids are increasingly moving into our neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's the way they're going to be able to adapt to doing. But that's one. The second biggest problem is crime, or the perception of crime, and how safe or unsafe. That fear of crime really drove that phenomena called cul-de-sac communities, and gated communities. There was only one way in and one way out, so you're not going to have the drive-by robber, murderer, rapist, whatever, was the fear of the moment. And I'm not trying to belittle the reality of that, but that didn't, most crime doesn't, from my understanding, is really with people you know, as opposed to that random person that is coming, unless you're in Bourbon Street. But it is a factor. To the extent to which that can be addressed and allayed, I think that, and the third is going to really be the cost of housing and things like that. I mean, we are, and this also has a major societal impact, and it's true for transportation. It has an impact secondarily on transportation. But we are taking areas that were low-income areas, and we're going back to the gentrification that existed in New York and around the country in the 80s. And that is a really frightening thing from my perspective in this respect. In New York City, where you had rent control, we were displacing lots of people who were living in those in the communities. And they were basically the poor and the elderly. And when I was at the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey and working on strategic plan for the organization, one of the biggest issues that I saw emerging and affecting us, because we owned the bus terminals and stations in New York City, in Manhattan, was the rise in homelessness. And it really was being driven by in part by the gentrification. And the other part was we emptied out all of our mental health institutions. We're going to give them smaller units where they had professional care and all, but they could live more as a group home. And then we turned around and didn't do any of that. We just let all of these people out. And most of these people were on medication. Right? And their medication ran out. And they didn't have any place to go. And one of the nicest places they could go, and this is really sad, is the Port Authority bus terminal, or the train stations, or the subway system. And as a result, you had a whole new population that was emerging of homelessness within your, we had young families. Right? This totally broke my heart when I started down there. We had people who were working as, had jobs. He worked in a bookstore. A rarity these days, but in the 80s there was still a number of good bookstores. They didn't get paid very much working and living in New York City. That's he had 2 young kids. Now this is a guy, this is the honest truth. Right? He bathed in the men's room. He got a bucket, and he would pour water, straddle the toilet seat, and he would pour the water on his head to take a shower because he needed to be presentable. I had 2 young kids, and they basically scrounged and all of that. They weren't getting an education, and you know, but this was the only place where he felt that he could go and he could keep his job. We had many women, older women in their 70s, 80s, an occasional 90, whose husband had died. They didn't have any families. They were in a rent-controlled apartment. They got gentrified. And all of a sudden, they're out on the street. They don't have any other place to go. Port Authority bus terminal became their home. So that's one group of folks. The other group of folks were the mentally challenged and mentally ill individuals, the alcoholics, and the drug-dependent population. It was an interesting set of people who occupied, and then you had the punks, you had the gangs, who liked to prey on each one of those groups. And the idea of raping a 75-year-old woman seemed to be something that they enjoyed doing. And so here you have a transportation facility, and this deals a little bit with society. What are we thinking about? Right? The transportation system becomes their home. and our first solution to this is what started getting me into this as a strategic issue. Well, we want to get the homeless out. So what we're going to do, now this is a 24-hour facility for buses, right? We're going to take out all of these chairs and the seats so that nobody has a place to sit and sleep on and things like that. That'll discourage them. Didn't seem to work. Now they were lying on the floor for the most part. So then we started to close out parts of the bus station and do what they did in Vietnam, create enclaves that were protected by cops with guns and Dobermans and German Shepherds. Really enticing place for you as a customer to come and go and watch. You certainly felt safe going in there to get your ride home to your suburb. It got to a point of where the cops with the guns and the dogs wouldn't go in the stairwells. Well, just as one of them, they had to go in groups because of the gangs. That was what, and that was affecting our transportation system. That was affecting our ability to work with our customers. Remember, transportation is all about customers. Unlike our rail passenger folks, who and this is God's honest truth, the heads of Amtrak, the heads of Penn Central, and others, in the past and unfortunately currently, people in their organization are more interested in moving the trains than they are about moving people. In fact, people are the biggest problem that they have. If we could get rid of all of the people, we'd have a really good system. And so it's the customers that are very important for our transportation. But that wasn't happening there. So we had to approach it from a variety of different things, and I won't bore you with all of that, but it brought me into the world of our public, not only public health, but also our programs that are supposed to be able to help people. Whether it's for food, whether it's for health, whether it's for shelter. And we are so traumatized by the fact that somebody's gonna rip us off, who doesn't deserve these things, that we have fractured all of those services. So even somebody who has a PhD or is able to deal with quantum mechanics and relativity with some degree of ease, not today, but at one point in my life, it was difficult to figure out how to work the system because we have so fractured it. And now we're asking people who are mentally handicapped or women who are 70 years old who have never been in this kind of environment to try to figure out how they're supposed to move into the system and be able to get the benefits and help that they're entitled to. So we had to set up our own group to be able to go and help after we figured out what it was, since we weren't used to do that. We brought in the churches and things like that. We brought in community organizations to try to move in. And but one of the biggest frightening things was we brought in the Department of Health to go in and take a look at the health of the population. We had diseases that we thought had disappeared. There were cases of tuberculosis, but the only place where you were seeing them were really in prisons that were penicillin and all of the immune, right? This was a really frightening kind of situation. Now, most of these were difficult diseases to transmit to the public at large, but was very present in much of the population of the homeless within the, and so we were able to start getting some of the people for that. And once that population started to get treated, then you could do a massive sweep and deal with the other, with the crime issue.
How many percent, or what percent of those homeless were veterans?
We never qualified that per se, other than in the alcohol and drug community, and I would say that half of that was, at the time, were the drug-dependent population on that. But the part of going back to that theme, when I was, here's society again, here's the transportation. Transportation is being used in a very different way. But you've got to accommodate, and the society is dictating that you accommodate it in a different way. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious, because I want to make sure, you know, unfortunately, time is kind of escaping, but you get the job to be the head transportation decision maker for the state of Louisiana.
Right.
You obviously have very, very progressive thoughts and experiences in what that means. What was your experience like?
Well, it was not too dissimilar to other DOTs. Most of the DOTs are dominated by an engineering mentality, and I'm not knocking that. My father and my son, one of my sons are engineers, but there is a mentality and a way of approaching problems well, within that education and temperament. They are like the railroad passenger side. We didn't have all these damn drivers, our roads would be great, and things like that to some extent. It's not as prevalent as in the rail passenger side. But that is a world that is, we know what we're supposed to do, we've been doing it, basically get out of the way. It's not a world that is comfortable with management, managing a transportation department. They're not very good at managing themselves, like doctors are not very good at managing themselves. They're very good at what they do, but not necessarily in managing for the most part. We have an attitude in this country, and it goes to a little bit to what you were saying in your introduction of it. We are highway oriented as a society in our public side of our transportation system. And that highway is basically to build and then replace if necessary. Right? It is not on the highway side to manage. We're managing a transportation. One, we're not building a system. We're building a network of roads and highways and bridges. But we are not building a transportation system. We're just building roads and bridges and highways. And we don't care about, for a long time, we didn't care about operations. Right? We didn't have people who were responsible for operating our highway system. No, roads got filled up with congestion. Whatever the cause of the congestion was, we don't care. We'll add another lane. We'll build a new road. Our solution to all of that, our financing is user fee. Right? User fees equal user benefits. Well, the emphasis has always been on the user fees. What about the benefits? Who benefits from our transportation system? And I don't mean just the highways. Who benefits?
That's what I want to know,
Huh?
the benefits. Since I work with the transit community here in New Orleans, I want to know who benefits.
Everybody benefits from our transportation system. The newborn baby that's just come into this world is benefiting from our freight system that has been able to get the diapers and food or whatever, and blankets and all. The person on death row benefits. Now, neither of those extremes benefit to the same extent that we all do. We're able to participate more in our transportation system. but they all benefit. If everyone benefits, then everyone should pay. So if we look at it from that perspective, does the user fee model work? Not really. And it's even worse in using the point that John started in the introduction. And that is, since we are funded by a gas tax, whether it's indexed or not, right? You as the head of a DOT want everybody to go out and get a Hummer and ride at least 1,000 miles a week. I need the gas tax, right? Does that make good energy policy? No. Does it make good environmental policy? Absolutely not, right? But that's how we finance our transportation system today, right? 2015, we're still financing it that way. Oh no, well, we don't need to do that anymore because it's not working because we've got more fuel efficient cars. We're gonna have alternative vehicles with gas, natural gas, with solar, with hydrogen. You can't, electricity, that model isn't gonna work. Let's go with vehicle miles traveled. Okay. I still need people to be driving. I need the vehicle miles. So instead of driving in a Hummer, you're driving in a Prius. Right? Well, if I have a model for financing that is requiring you to be on the road a lot, we're surprised you have congestion. Right? We have a model that wants you to be consuming the product all of the time. So that doesn't seem to work in my mind. And this is where I start to get into real trouble. I look at transportation's contribution to the economy. And if you look at transportation's contribution to the economy in terms of GNP, we're about 10 to 11%. So from the public, federal side, why not go out and do away with the taxes, the user fee taxes, the 18.3 cents that they collect at the federal level, turn that back to the states, right? That would help Louisiana a lot and other states. And now use the income tax. It's the most progressive of all of the taxes. And then use the general fund. Oh, you can't do that. We've got this history of it. Well, since the Highway Trust Fund has been on the verge of bankruptcy, and in reality bankruptcy, for the last 15 years, either on the verge or in real bankruptcy, including today, there's been a general fund that bailed us out. Now we've got a proposal in the House that says, well, you have the Federal Reserves, they have a capital fund, let's just take some of that, certain percentage of that. Why are we doing all of this? The easier way of doing it, and a way to be able to get corporations and individuals to pay for the use of their transportation system, for the benefits of it, is the income tax. But that would require us maybe raising the income tax because we want to segregate 10% for transportation. And then the other thing is to do away with all of the modes as individual silos and focus on, and this is where I ran into problems within the department and within the community, focus on the transportation system. And going back to some of the earlier comments about what is the society, what's our goal, what is our purpose? I can meet work-related purposes by using transit. I can use it by bicycles and walking and the automobile. What's the best combination of investments for us to maximize what our customers want in terms of mobility? And that, and focusing on that, focusing on transit, and trying to and get a state role in transit was met with considerable opposition. the administration felt, and most of the legislature, that transit is a local issue. It's not a state issue, and it's not a federal, should not be a federal issue. The community wants transit, the community should pay for transit. The fact that we're all suffering from not having transit options within the state, except for in locations like New Orleans, but in Baton Rouge, bus transit is for poor people. No, why would I want to invest in that?
I know, like a couple of years back, we had a shuttle bus out of Swift, they call it,
Yep.
from Baton Rouge to New Orleans.
Right.
And matter of fact, New Orleans, I want to say New Orleans tourists came in because after we did it, because the people were still wanted the transportation between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and our ridership was high.
Yes, LA Swift was good. Federal government was paying was paying a full amount. To keep it running, I needed 20%. And I was told to take that out of that I couldn't put that in our budget. Right?
Told by whom?
By the Department of Administration. So I pleaded, I knew some of the folks from FDA, and in fact, I knew a number of the people in Washington and FDA, and knew the folks in Dallas were running it. And I pleaded and begged and all of this, and got another year and a half of 100% federal funding as a way of being able to keep it LA Swift alive. But LA Swift is not as robust as it was. It's still running, I think, still some minimal service, but there's again, and the irony is that if you look at a state like New Jersey, New Jersey is contracted out in certain parts where they didn't have bus service or rail service. They contracted out with the private sector to run bus service, and it was and is very successful. They get the coaches. The Department of Transportation and New Jersey Transit pay for the buses. The private operators are totally responsible for the operation costs and for the service. If they are not performing the service, since the DOT and NJ Transit own the buses, their operating capabilities are removed, and you go back and they get somebody else. It's a very rare case. And people who are going and working in Wall Street and all of this, not your poor, not your low-income people, supposedly that we need to have this kind of service for, ride it every day. So it is, transit is not big in the South, period. It is particularly limiting in that. And the idea of integrating our highway money, quote unquote, and supporting other transportation modes is not something that the state is interested in doing, and was part of what I was interested in doing. I also was interested in starting to look, I was opposed to, and this gets into the freight side, that world is changing dramatically. And one of the things that's going to change it over the next 10 years significantly is going to be 3D printing. How many of you know about 3D printing? 3D printing is going to be a revolution. It's going to be transformational, just as this is, and being able to go to Uber and things like that, for changing transportation mobility, is going to actually democratize manufacturing. And the freight side is going to be the first place you're going to be able to start seeing the implications.
The freight side?
Freight.
Because you can make things.
I can make things. I don't need to have parts made somewhere else and delivered. I can make them in my own bus maintenance facility. I can make them in my home. Much of the stuff that is made in China and Southeast Asia, I'll be able to make in my home or in a community center. Where the biggest issue is going to be getting the materials for it. General Electric and is one of the major manufacturers of turbines. And General Electric, it takes to refurbish one of their turbines, it takes 45 weeks. You have to take that out of service. With 3D printing, they've reduced that to 5 weeks. And the parts that they're using to replace it are stronger than the molded parts because of the layering. The plywood is often stronger than a regular sheet of wood at the same thickness. That the binding creates greater strength. They've reduced about 40 weeks a turbine for being out of service. Tremendous cost savings and value. They get parts that are lasting longer than they have previously, so the useful life of that turbine for the next replacement and all of this is further out. So again, I have greater utilization of equipment. This is going to be happening when if they're in charge of procurement for the bus folks, for the DOTs, for their equipment, you're going to want for the bus, not just, I want all of spec. I want all every spec on what screws you've got, what washers you have, everything that's in that. Why? Because if I've got the schematics, I run them through on my 3D printer, and I have my part. Just-in-time delivery is there. A lot of the stuff that they were saying about China, I can make now. And by the way, there are stores cropping up all over. I don't know whether New Orleans has one yet, but a number of places like Boston, you can go, and if you're getting married, for example, you can go in with a picture of you and your significant other and say, I want a wedding topper to look like us. And lo and behold, they make it, among other things. I mean, that's a trivial kind of thing, but it's what turbines for one end and toppers for a wedding cake. The span is enormous. But I'm going to be able to manufacture at home. And if I'm doing that, or in small groups, manufacturing with 3D printing, guess what? That changes the whole logistics of freight. That'll change the movement of people and what they're doing as we're going. So you have this world on one end, you've got the 3D printing on another, you've got the demographic changes that are happening in our society. And if we do see more of an acceptance of your generation staying in the urban areas, we're going to find ourselves in a very different world in the next 10, 15 years. And that's exciting, it truly is. But a lot of our old transportation planning models, our traffic estimations, who does what to whom, all of that is in flux now.
Is there a particular book that you could recommend that a futurist may have written on this whole subject?
Not really. I mean, there are things about each the separate things. And I think one, and this is very vain of me, but one of the skill sets I think I have is to see some of these desperate things and start to try to pull them together with respect to the interests that I have, in this case, transportation. You know, by the way, on biomedical ethics, 3D printing is going to be a huge issue, right? And the medical side, 3D printing is happening phenomenally. We're able to take a mouse that has a heart condition, blocked arteries and things like that, artificially created by us, thank you, go and use the tissues of the mouse, their own blood vessel tissues, clone them, and they use 3D printing to create a new vascular system in the area and then transplant it into the mouse. It works, right? This is not science fiction. The rejection issues are minimal because they're using the cells of the thing. I mean, how to deal with the heart? Probably my heart is not going to be able to make the transition to that opportunity, but because it's going to, for humans, it's going to be a long time coming. But this is the stuff that's out there. We're utilizing our own tissues systems. So it's an exciting world, and our society is affecting it with these kinds of ideas, and how our transportation system is responding. You're going to see on the goods movement side totally new logistics, not just for 3D printing, but if 3D printing does take off the way I think it's going to, you're going to see a diminution of trade with Southeast Asia and all of that, and China. That'll affect the amount of cargo ships that are going to be plying in the ocean. You're going to see an effect on the railroads. The demographic changes in goods movement are already affecting that. As the Panama Canal is widened, shipments to the East Coast do not need, you get the bigger ships. They're going to be coming in. You're going to need something like transshipment. Cuba, now with our new relation, is the transshipment place. They've got natural harbors that will make it work real well. And so you're going to see that happening. You're also going, and that's going to affect railroads. All right? You're not going to be coming into Long Beach and then railing it out. You're going to be looking at Mexico, the Pacific ports there, as Kansas City Southern is looking at to bring in. You're going to looking at the Panama Canal. But the other major shift in demographics on freight, well, for the manufacturing, is Southeast Asia, which means that you're going to see the Suez Canal being greater utilization for ships, because it's shorter and cheaper to service the East Coast by that. And that means that for the first time in the history of the United States, you're going to see an equalization of goods movement for both coasts. You're not going to have, as you did up until the end of the 80s, the service to Chicago and the West Coast coming from the East Coast by rail. And then since the 80s to now, from the West Coast coming into to the East Coast. You're going to see it now basically being equalized, and that's going to change. Our railroads are going to become more regional. Trucking is going to have some interesting activities. And then one of the other things that's going to affect, and probably be the first area to be affected in our society by technology and automation, is going to be autonomous trucks. That's where I think you're going to see the first. They're already being used in China and in Germany. I think you'll start seeing the integration of those in. The trucking industry has lots of good reasons to want to use it. One is they can't get enough drivers. The laws and regulations that exist for the trucking community is such that you have to have significant rest periods, which costs them, either in having two drivers and alternating, like the Pony Express used to do. It's amazing how we've got back to some extent in our history. But it, or to pay for the layovers that are needed. I don't have any of those kind of problems. I don't have the drug and alcohol problems that the trucking industry experiences, which is one of the reasons they don't have as many drivers as they can use, as they need. So you're going to see a change in that. You're going to see a change in congestion with our technology, with all the things with being able to see around your vehicle, stop vehicle. Even if you don't go to fully autonomous, you're going to see a change in that, with that technology affecting our roads. So all of the other issues that I was talking about in the demographics and the social media and the technology, add to that autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles. 40% of our traffic congestion is due to accidents. Right? And for every minute of an incident during peak period, it's about 3 to 4 minutes worth of congestion. Right? So the longer it sits, this is another area I got in trouble with in the state. The trucking industry has a very strong lobby and presence here. If a truck turns over, a semi turns over here in Louisiana, the DOT, through somebody it hires or itself, can't push that truck off the road. Now, this is without, there's no accident or injuries, it's just the truck just push that off the side of the road to open up the road. No. The owner of the contents of the trailer has an hour to determine how they want that content to be taken care of. Now in Rhode Island, when I was there, they look at a law that says content is damaged. Right? We push it off and open up. And so we're not liable for anything that happens in pushing it off. It's not true here in Louisiana. So instead of being able to strategically locate at certain times of the day the large wreckers that can push this stuff off and open up a road within 40 minutes, right? Which is still a lot of congestion. In Louisiana, got an hour for the owner, then I gotta figure out what they want to do, if they want to offload it before they get it. I mean, so you end up in a situation where you can have a truck overturned for a number of hours and you create other safety issues. Because that accident has now created more congestion and people coming up and having more frequent accidents, which then create other kinds of problems. So it is that kind of, but getting that rule changed, that law change, I was totally unsuccessful in. But it's so it is, but the technology is going to be such that I'm not going to have as many incidents. And if I don't have the incidents, that capacity that already exists in your roadway system is freed up. So the impact of on congestion in the future, for all the things that I've talked about before, will also diminish the congestion in the peak periods.
Bill, one of the things that we're looking at in our class, and we're going to do a group exercise tomorrow on this, is the last mile. And in New Orleans, we have a situation where the port has been growing, freight movements have been increasing, and in the same geographic locations, you know, particularly the neighborhoods along the river, have also been growing in populations due to the millennials and the baby boomers wanting to live in these historic mixed-use walking, cycling, transit neighborhoods. I've been doing some interviews for a research project asking people from the passenger and freight transportation side, how do we handle these last mile issues? And is there any, you know, coordination or communication? And so far the answer is no. There is really no coordination across freight and transit, freight and passenger, do you see in the future or in other cities increasing coordination across the modes from passenger and freight on these last mile issues?
No. That doesn't mean that efforts haven't been underway or that isn't an important issue. The last mile often is costly, one of the most costly piece, just as our healthcare costs for the last mile are also is significantly costly. So it seems to be that issue of the last mile is important, and when it hasn't been as explored as it should be. The problem is that we've created our institutions, in part the problem is that we've created our institutions to be silos. And one of the best things, I mean, the US DOT talks about being a transportation department. Louisiana DOTD is supposed to be a transportation department, but we really are a highway department. And every effort to try to go do transit, to do freight, whether it's water, that's all relegated to either minor parts of the organization. When I try to bring transit up to be part of the office of the secretary, and to bring ports and to bring the multimodal side up to give it some presence, that didn't go over too well either.
Great idea.
And it became part of planning, so you lost even more status. But it is, when we looked at it, I tried to do the first strategic freight plan for the state, and have brought in shippers, providers, customers to talk about what the needs were. I made a fundamental mistake. It was an intentional decision, but it ended up being a costly mistake. I didn't want any of the associations. I didn't want the mouthpiece to be there. I wanted actual people who had to live with the decisions and to help shape the decision making of where I went. And in part, the strategic mistake on my part was excluding them to the point of where, when we did the plan and we got some buy-in from all of the parties, they killed it because they weren't part of it. And it was a mistake on my part. But it is, but this state does not look at transportation as a system. They looked at it, this is the ports, this is transit, this is highways, this is rural highways, roads. We keep fracturing our transportation system, but they're not to be blamed any more than US DOT. Take a look at the US Senate, if you care to. Here's how transportation is handled in the US Senate. You've got the Environment and Public Works Committee, which deals with highways. You have the Senate Banking Committee that deals with transit. You have the Senate Commerce Committee that deals with intercity rail, intercity bus, trucking, and rail freight, ports, and airports.
Okay, excuse me, can you back up? Who deal with the inner city rails and buses?
The Commerce Committee
Okay.
of the Senate. And then you throw in the Appropriations Committees, the Finance Committees, the Budget Committees, all which have transportation but have specialists basically looking at the individual modes, right? And you wonder why we can't talk about transportation as a system? Why we can't get that last mile looked at in terms of an integration of a system? We built in with our laws and our regulations, and they're different entities. You've got FRA, you've got commuter rail, but which has the FTA, right? You have, so just dealing with the rail passenger side, you've got two very different committees. I mean, two very different entities within US DOT just dealing with those, right? And, you know, you've got an organization that is risk averse. The public sector is almost by necessity risk averse. You screw up in your history. You can be doing great all your life, right? But if you're a civil servant, and I was not a civil servant in the traditional sense of civil service, and I'm not talking about myself. I knew the risk that I walked into for every executive position I've had. But if you take risks, you can get an attaboy, attagirl, if you're successful. You screw up, you're basically stuck where you are, for the most part, unless you're lucky.
Relate to Reagan's discussion, do you think the benefits of the I-49 project are going to outweigh the costs?
No.
So why are we building it?
Politics.
I wanted to ask this right after you mentioned the trucking lobby. I wasn't sure
Trucking wants it.
their role in pushing it.
Well, do you know about the time program?
Yeah.
Here, anybody know?
Yeah.
The legislature decided that they were going to invest in the in transportation and create a certain amount of money to do specific projects throughout the state that couldn't be funded normally out of the transportation. And that's not a bad idea. One of the drivers of this is that if you increase the capacity of your roadway system, you are going to get economic development. Which is also, now I-49 North certainly had that same mentality. That if we create that, we're going to create new and better opportunities for the economies up there. Most of the projects that we have done, the most economic development you really have had is at the intersections with McDonald's, at the interchanges with McDonald's and some hotels or something like that, right? Again, if you're looking at transportation as outside of a society, we didn't need that. That isn't where we're on. And we sure as hell don't need to go further into the rural areas with greater capacity when we're seeing demographic changes that are moving in a very different direction. But we did it, right? I-49 was on the books for almost forever in the transportation world, right? Federal transportation world. It was supposed to get completed. The trucking industry wanted it, big time. As it's getting completed here in the state, it was a political promise by the governor to do that to the people up in the Northwest. You couldn't charge tolls on it. You couldn't charge a surcharge on transportation up there to pay for it. The argument being for the community, and there's some value to that argument, which is you didn't charge anybody else for those kinds of improvements elsewhere. Why the hell are you charging us? The problem is that Arkansas has no interest in completing their part. So all of this great mobility up to Kansas City isn't going to happen per se until Arkansas does what it was. Maybe it'll shave off sometime, probably, but now instead of going from Shreveport up to Missouri, where the road is completed, I just have to go from Arkansas to Missouri, and so there's a little bit less time. But So until Arkansas comes in, and nobody can force Arkansas to spend their money on that, it won't happen. And Arkansas didn't see any of the demand for that, other than from basically the trucking lobby. For the southern part, the strategy that we developed was, well, one, in order to meet the sustainability issues south of Lafayette, you had to put most of the roadway on structures. That's a fortune, not only in the construction part, but also for the maintenance, which is another one of our failings. We only look at construction. When we price something, we only say it's only going to cost you $1 billion to build that. Doesn't point out that it's going to cost you over 20 years and another $500 million to maintain it. So we don't price things at fully allocated costs. But for that part, if you go to structures, so what we've been doing is looking at the intersections, and then doing overpasses, flyovers, so that the traffic can move on the southern part of 49 without traffic lights and things like that. And that's working until you get to the New Orleans kind of area and the Lafayette area. And the Lafayette area is rather a challenge. But you've got over $1 billion worth of work there just to do Lafayette. And I don't know where the money's going to come from.
What is the path of I-49 approximately? Connects from New Orleans to Lafayette all the way up north?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like an L?
Up to the Arkansas border. So
Kind of follows the central part of the state and kind of shoots straight up.
US 90.
US 90 there.
Oh, US 90,
Yeah.
okay.
And we're making lots of improvements. The amount of time taken from Lafayette down has been considerably reduced because of the overpasses and flyovers that have been out. And your biggest problem still is within the Lafayette area, and then when you come down here, off the 90. But that's also part of, again, we aren't thinking about that last mile in some of our, but the rail freight's going to see just changes, and logistical changes are going to be big in the trucking industry as well. And again, as our society is emerging and evolving, as it always will, it's going to affect what our transportation needs are, what our mobility needs are, and how our transportation system is going to morph.
Okay. On that note, I want to ask you about, just like you said, we are growing. I am a bus operator. I drive a bus every day. During our peak time, I'm going to say weekly, we have a ridership of over 80,000 people. We found out that more people are parking their vehicles and riding downtown instead of driving downtown and paying parking fees and stuff like that. So they rather, and being in traffic, so they rather ride the bus or ride the streetcar. We have streetcar or ride the bikes. So we are caught in, as a union or using women president, we are caught in 2020. We are joined together with Transam to fund for, to ask for more funding for transit and specifically transit, not just transportation, but in specifically transit. Therefore, on that note, New Orleans is building up. They are building more condos and more apartments and schools, and we are carrying those people, rich and poor, medium class, all kinds of people. So, in that note, what are the good? Give us a good suggestion. Because I'm one of the ones that will be going to speak, and I don't want to speak out of turn, and I want to speak what I'm speaking about. I want to know what I'm speaking about.
Well, one of the ways of financing, and John is one of the experts in this area.
I know, I'm building him in the near future.
Is in value capture. And
You heard what I said, John? I'll be bugging you in the near future. Okay.
And we've done a horrible job, particularly in transit, but on the highway side as well. But but if you look at transit, because transit, unlike the highway side, does do operations. It operates something. It's more than an engineering firm. And highway side is starting to move away from that to some extent and manage traffic. But value capture, let's take the Washington Metro. Was a perfect example. We built a brand new system in the 70s and 80s. And still we're doing some things now. Or high-speed rail in California. Those kinds of investments create new value. You want to be near the stations. You want to have access to high-speed rail or to metro, or to the trolley, or to the streetcar. I'm still, as a Northeasterner, still used to trolleys as opposed to streetcars. But we don't, those new condos, you're creating new wealth. Why aren't we taking ask for a piece of the property taxes, percentage of that to go for transit operation costs? Washington DC with the metro, the Virginia and but more so in Maryland, the communities like Chevy Chase and all were dying suburbs. The metro totally revitalized that. But we couldn't get the policymakers and the decision makers, the states and the federal government, to turn around and say, give us 5% of, not the existing taxes that you're charging for the community for real estate here, but 5% of the growth of your taxes to be put into a transit operating, to pay for. And Singapore does a great deal of value capture successfully. There is no reason why in many of our large cities, if we had used the concept of value capture, that we would have to be dealing with any other subsidy than fares and the value that we've captured. By the way, that didn't really go over very well when I proposed that for the rail system coming in between Baton Rouge or New Orleans either. Because you're creating a new service. There isn't the growth there that transportation, a transportation investment can have significant value in the right context. Building I-49 in the northern part of, well north of Shreveport doesn't have the same kind of value that the transits might be serving here in New Orleans because of the developments that's going on. But you look and you say, okay, what's the, again, going back to one of the things I said, what's the purpose of the trip? Who's using it? Why are they using it? What do they want for the system to do for us? And one of the things, again, going back to the concept of the transportation system, as opposed to the silos that we created, we function as using a transportation system every day. If I go and take your train, I'm either driving to it or I'm walking to it. Right? That's two modes. Why are we separating these when we're looking at this? Why is it that we're not looking at the total trip and what's happening, including the last mile, as to what we're trying to achieve, as opposed to looking at simply the aspect that we are charged with, as opposed to the mode that we're charged with. So looking at our transportation as a system, looking at it as being part of a community, as opposed to an end in itself, starts to change the dynamics of how you do planning, how you do financing, how you relate to the community, how you relate to the environment, and I think, and how you utilize technology and integrate that into it. And if you keep in mind that transportation is for customers, as opposed to, this is a great rail system, we just didn't have to deal with these damn people. I think you then build in a transportation system that better meets the needs of the community and the people who are seeking the mobility that they have. I had planned initially in mind to have more of a dialogue, and I'm sorry for that. I ended up spouting much too much, and I'm sorry.
No. I want to thank you for coming. What we're going to do is, I know the flyer said 10 to 11, but and it was my fault.
I was told it was 10 to 11. But 10 to 1.
I said 10 to 11:30 for the lecture, and we're going to go grab lunch. And everybody here, well, my students are required to come to lunch. But those of you that are not part of my class are invited to come to lunch to continue a dialogue. What we need to do, I guess, is decide where we would like to go eat. Does anybody who's not in my class, which I think is just 3 of you, want to join us? Yeah, get back. You'll have to get back.
I'm on vacation.
Okay, all right. Well, why don't we try to go to Reginald's? Does that sound good? Pizza place? Oh, Matt, too. Do you want to come with us?
I'm not good.
No, okay. Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you for being a very polite group of folks and allowed me to pontificate more than I can do.
I enjoyed it, thank you.
Say hi to both.
Yeah, so, if anybody has any last questions, obviously, feel free to ask, but
Oh, yeah.
we'll get more time with Dr. Ankner over lunch as well.